So a few months ago, I started watching these study with me videos on YouTube. And if you guys aren't familiar with these videos, it's basically where people record themselves studying. And as they're doing this, they'll play some calming music in the background. And at the same time, they'll set some timer to actually do their work. And then as soon as the timer's up, they'll set a 5-minute timer to take a break. And this type of studying where you do your work based on time intervals is known as the Pomodoro technique. And it's what I use from time to time, especially if I need to focus on a particular task. But for me, the biggest issue I had with these study with me videos is that if I found a video where I didn't like the music, then I found it really hard to focus on whatever task I was doing. So my temporary solution to this was to use 2 tabs in my browser. In one tab, I would have my study timer, and then in the other tab, I would have my music playing. And the main advantage of this was that I got full control of the music that was being played, but the main disadvantage is that it was really tedious and time consuming having to manually reset the 25-minute study timer after it ended, and then having to set the break timer as soon as that was over, and having to do this over and over and over again. But eventually I thought of a pretty cool way to actually automate this entire process. And the idea that I had in mind was a YouTube Pomodoro app that will first allow you to sign in with your Google account. And right after you're authenticated, it'll let you select any one of your YouTube playlists. And right after you select a playlist, it'll play the first video within your browser. And in the background, your study timer will begin. And as soon as the study timer ends, my idea is to automatically pause the YouTube video and then start your break timer. And then when the break timer ends, it'll automatically play the YouTube video. And so by doing all of this, we're basically creating our own study with me tool, all within one application. And to actually build this app, the main technology that we're going to be using is the YouTube Data API, which will actually allow us to access our playlist data. And then along with the YouTube API, we're going to be using Flask for the backend and then Angular for the front end. And if you're unfamiliar with any of these terms that I'm using, don't worry, because I'm going to be explaining each of these technologies step by step so that even if you don't have any coding experience, you'll still be able to follow along and learn something from watching this video. So yeah, that's pretty much the whole project explanation. If you guys do enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you have any feedback on the video, be sure to leave a comment below. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, so to actually start building this project, I thought it would be a good idea to start at the YouTube API docs. And these are actually laid out really nicely because it starts off with this intro here, but the important part is this quick start guide, because this is actually going to help us get started in building our project. First step is just we need a Google account, which is already taken care of. But the second step is we actually have to create a new project with the Google Developer Console. So we can start off by just clicking this link here. It takes us to the Developer Console. And the first thing we're going to want to do here is just create a new project. And we can just call it YouTube Pomodoro. We don't have an organization, so we're just going to click create. And now our project is created. So now that we have a project made, we can go to credentials. So now that we're on the credentials page, we can click on create credentials. And we don't want API key or service account. What we want is OAuth client ID. And the reason for that is because we want to implement Google's OAuth 2, which will allow our users to authenticate with their Google account. And I'll explain this a little bit later on, but this is the one we're going to select for now. Okay, so I've gone ahead and created our credentials. So what we can do now is click in our credential information. And as you can see here, we're given both a client ID as well as a client secret. So the client ID is just the unique identifier for our application. This is a unique ID only specific to our application. And the client secret is a secret key only known to our application. And you can kind of think of this as our application's password in a way. And for that reason, we want to keep this client secret hidden so that our application doesn't have any vulnerabilities or security concerns. But even more importantly, the client ID and client secret will actually allow us to implement OAuth 2. So I keep mentioning OAuth 2, but I never actually explained what it is. But pretty much the whole idea behind OAuth 2 is that it allows website A to access data that exists on website B. So in our case, let's say that our application is website A, and then website B is YouTube. And the information that we want to access is your playlist data. And keep in mind that playlists can either be public, private, or unlisted. For those public playlists, if I visit your channel on YouTube and I go to your playlists, any playlist that shows up, I know that all of those are public. And for the unlisted playlists, if you just send me the link to it, I'll pretty much be able to access it whenever I want. But for private playlists, only you are able to access those. And for that reason, we want to allow the user to log in with their Google account so that even if they have private playlists or public or unlisted, it doesn't matter, because as long as they're authenticated, they'll be able to view all of their playlists within our application. And the really cool thing about OAuth 2 is that it's actually going to allow us to implement that sign in with Google functionality while keeping your personal information like your username, password, private at the same time. And those are the main reasons that OAuth 2 is so popular today, and that's why we're going to be using it in our own application for this video. And if you guys have any more questions about OAuth 2 or like how it works, be sure to leave that in the comments below, and I'll answer any questions that you do have. Okay, so now that we have our credentials and our project created, we can skip to step 4, which is actually writing the code for our authentication with Google. So it does look like they do have some Flask examples set up that we can follow, and I think from here I'm just going to follow this guide and get a basic web server set up so that we can get our authentication flow started. Alright, so I've gone ahead and just created a simple backend in Flask, and I haven't tested any of this code yet, but hopefully it just kind of works. To actually test it out, we can open up our terminal here, and if we run the command python and then server.py, it'll spin up our development server. So let's test the auth flow directly, and if we pick our account, now it says Google hasn't verified the app, but that makes sense because it hasn't actually been published or anything like that. So we can just click continue, and then we just hit continue one more time, and hopefully this should allow us to actually sign in. Okay, so it's refusing to connect, and I think I might know why. So notice how in the URL it says localhost 4200 is what it's trying to connect to, but our Flask app is running on localhost 8080, so I think I just have a port number wrong somewhere in the code. Okay, so just looking back at the code here, basically what we want to do is search for that port number that's incorrect. So yeah, okay, so 4200, pretty much what's happening is after we're authenticating ourselves, the server is redirecting us to localhost 4200, which is incorrect because nothing is running on that yet. So if we change that back to 8080, it should work. And then we clear our session just to start fresh. And so now if we test the auth flow directly, we click our account and then we continue and we consent to all of the conditions. And cool, so now it takes us back to the server and we should be authenticated now. And just to make sure we're authenticated, we can actually test an API request. And you can see here that it gives me information on my YouTube channel. So it tells me my channel name, which is my first and last name, and then it gives me all this other data, which tells us that we are in fact connected. Okay, so now that we know we're able to sign in with our Google account, I wanted to take a second to just kind of explain how the code is working. And to actually explain how this all works, I wanted to explain the difference between the front end and the back end of our application so that we understand how the two sides of our application works and how they kind of connect to each other. So the front end is pretty much everything that you can see and interact with on a website. So things like text, images, or buttons are all things that you can see and interact with. So these are considered part of the front end. And then the back end is pretty much everything going on behind the scenes that you're not able to see. And one example of this is YouTube's recommendation system. So in the background, the system is going through all of your likes, dislikes, clicks, and it's trying to predict which videos you might want to watch next. And you're not able to actually see any of this going on, right? Because this is going on in the background as part of the back end of the YouTube website. And then for our application on the front end, we're going to have stuff like a countdown timer, YouTube videos, as well as text and images. And then on the back end, it's our Flask web server that we just created that allows our user to actually log in with their Google account. So that's pretty much the main difference between the front end and the back end. I think at this point, I want to start pulling our playlist data from YouTube so we can actually start seeing what that looks like. Okay, so I've gone ahead and created this get playlist method, and pretty much what this is going to allow us to do is just get a list of our current YouTube playlists. And just to explain a little bit on how this works, so the first thing we're going to do is check if we are logged in or not. If we're not, then we're going to redirect the user to the login screen. Otherwise, we load their credentials, and then we create this service object, which is actually going to allow us to make requests to the YouTube data API. And then finally, we use our service objects interface to actually make the API request and just save it to our playlist variable. And to actually test if this all works, what I'm going to do is create an example playlist on YouTube and see if we can pull the data into our own application. All right, so I've got a video pulled up here, and what we're going to do is we're going to use this to create a new playlist, and I'm just going to call this one example playlist. And then for the privacy, I'm going to leave it as private since we're now authenticated within our own application, so we should be able to see it show up even if it is private. And then if we actually just go to /playlist here, and we see, okay, cool. So we see for the title, it says example playlist, and it should just have one item within it. And the item count here actually confirms it. So we only have one video added to the playlist. And then if I click on another video and I do save, and then I add it to our existing playlist, if I go back here and I refresh the page or I resubmit the request, now the item count is 2 because we have 2 songs in the playlist. And because of that, we know that it's working correctly. All right, so it's currently January 22nd. And it's officially day number 2 of me working on this project. And so far, I've only worked on the back-end part of the project, but today I mostly wanted to focus on using Angular to actually design the front end. And to be honest, I don't really have a specific design in mind for the front end, but I do think it'd be a good idea to just start out by sketching a few simple pages so that we can get a sense of what the front end might look like. So in total, I had 4 pages in mind. For the first page, it's just going to be the login screen, and right underneath it, it's probably going to be like a welcome message or something like that, or some instructions on how to use the app. The second page is just going to be where you select whichever playlist you want to play in your browser, and then that third page is going to be where you set both your study timer and your break timer. And then finally, the last page is where your video will be playing, and also the countdown timer will be going on as well. So hopefully this design makes sense. And yeah, let's just get started on actually writing the code to implement our front-end design. Alright, so the first step in designing our front end is going to be to create a brand new Angular project. So I'm just going to open up my command prompt, and what we're going to want to do is use the command ng, which stands for Angular, and then new is the keyword that we use to make a brand new project, and I'm just going to call the project front end. And right after running the command, it asks us if we want to set up Angular routing, which we do, because that's going to help us control what the user sees. So it's going to help us both hide and display certain components. And then we're going to choose SCSS for the style sheet, and it's going to go ahead and create all of the starter files that we need for our project. And as this is running, just to kind of explain what Angular is exactly, it's basically just a JavaScript framework that we use to create user interfaces. And you can think of a user interface as our front end, everything that the user sees and interacts with. All right, cool. So just finished creating our project. So what we can do now is just cd into our front end. And now we can cd into source and then app. And then from there we can type in ng-serve, and that's the command that we use to run our project. Oh, and by the way that I knew kind of like what those files were is because after we ran ng-new, it creates source and then it creates app, which is where our components exist. Okay, cool. So it just finished running, and it tells us we have a server running on localhost 4200. So we can just open that up to see what it looks like. So let's go ahead and type in localhost 4200. And okay, cool. So since we were getting this display, we know that our app is working because it gives us this message saying front-end app is running, as well as all of this starter template to work with. What we can do, just to make sure that the app is working, if we go back to our project, and if we open up app component HTML, if we actually go here and change title to YouTube Pomodoro, and then we save it, we should see that same change reflect in our browser. So yeah, you can see here, it says our app name is running, and we know that we're connected. All right, so now that we know our app is running properly, what we can do is just go into the code, specifically app component HTML, and we can get rid of all of this starter code because we don't need any of it for our application. All right, so I just went ahead and got rid of all the starter code. So now if we go back to our browser, we have a white page, and so now we can just start from scratch. So I think at this point, what I'm gonna do is just take our blank website and turn it into those 4 simple pages that we came up with from earlier. And as soon as I'm done with the basic implementation, I'll come back later to show you guys the progress. Alright, so I've been working on the front end for the past few hours and I have a few updates. So to start off, we can press continue with Google. So all we have to do is just enter in our email, and when that's done, we enter in our password. Alright, so once all of our credentials are entered, we're taken to this page. But yeah, to actually use this page, we just select a playlist from the dropdown. Let's pick this one, and then after we do that, it takes us to this page. So on this one, we can actually set an interval for our study timer. So I'm just going to set it to 5 seconds since this is just a demo. And then for the break timer, I'm going to set that to like 4 seconds, just so we can see that they're different. And so once I hit set timer, it takes us to the study page. And I'm just going to pause that for a second, but a few things happen when we come to this page. First thing is it loads up our YouTube video, and this is just the first video in the playlist, and it just automatically plays it in the browser. And you'll see that once the study timer ends, it'll automatically pause the YouTube video. And it automatically paused it because our study time is over, break starts, and then once the break ends, the video automatically resumes. So right now, the app like sort of works. The basic functionality is there, and the core concepts are implemented. The only issue is that there is about a million bugs. One bug in particular is if I actually refresh this page, basically the entire app just breaks. And the reason it breaks is because we're not actually saving any of our information on our study timer or the playlist that we selected or any of that. It all just kind of vanishes when we hit refresh. And to fix that, basically what we need to do is figure out a way to persist our data on the back end to make sure that it's not lost when we refresh the page. But yeah, in general though, there's a lot of bugs that I need to fix with both the front end and the back end. So I'm gonna work on that, and hopefully the next time I check in with you guys, I'll have something that's close to completed. Alright, so it's currently February 3rd right now, and I don't even remember the day that I recorded the last clip, but it's been a minute for sure. And the main reason this project has been taking me so long to do is just because of work and school and stuff like that. But I do have some exciting updates to show you guys on the app. Most of it is just styling fixes, and then a lot of bug fixes on the back end as well that were giving us some errors. So yeah, pretty much the plan for the rest of the video is I'm going to walk you guys through the finalized version of the app that we made, and then to close out the video, I'm going to deploy the app to a live website. Okay, so I think the first clear difference between this version of the website and the other one is that this one is in dark mode. I don't know, I kind of just feel like everything looks better in dark mode, so I just made a dark background, and then for the steps here, I kind of just centered them a little bit, and so hopefully now it looks a little bit cleaner. And then the font is different as well, so I think this is called Inter. I'm pretty sure it's like a Google font. Yeah, so it's called Inter. I've used this one for previous projects, and I really just like the look of it. So on to the next page. If we continue with Google, it's just going to redirect me to this page because I already was signed in like through my browser. And then with this page, I also made it dark mode. I kind of moved this header, so this is the one that was on the first page. I included it on this page as well, and then just made the submit button darker pretty much. We can select this one and hit submit. And then this page, so there's really not that many differences just looking at it now, but if I resize it, you'll see that all the buttons and everything is actually responsive. So when I make it smaller, it still looks fine. And then if it gets bigger, all of the buttons still stay nicely in the grid. And then yeah, same exact thing for the break timer. It's responsive as well. So I can just set like 7 seconds for that. But yeah, in terms of the dark theme, this page, as well as the playlist one, and then the home page are all going to be dark. The other major change is that this page is now kind of like a 3-column layout, so you can select whatever playlist you want on the left side. So I can switch that here, and then I can just pause that. And then on the right side, I've moved the countdown timer, and I made it a little bit smaller as well. So yeah, besides like minor bug fixes, those are all the major updates I've made to the site. I think for now, what I'm going to try to do is actually get this deployed to a live website. And the service that we're going to use to actually deploy our app is called Heroku. And if you're not familiar with Heroku, it's basically just a collection of cloud services that allow you to deploy, manage, and then like scale your applications. But even though Heroku has a lot of services that we can use, what we're most interested in is just deploying our application. So there's actually this nice article here that basically breaks down the entire process of how we deploy our application to Heroku and how it kind of serves all of our code. So the way the article begins is basically just gives an introduction into saying that any application that you write is really just a collection of source code. And within your source code, there's a description of dependencies that lets your build system know like which additional dependencies you need in order to actually like run your application. And for Python, what we're going to need to do is create a requirements.txt file that has all of the different packages and dependencies that our app relies on. And kind of the next important piece that the article talks about is something called proc file. And pretty much all the proc file is it just contains all of the commands that you need in order for your application to actually execute. And then finally, after we have all of our files set up, the last thing we do is just git push Heroku master, which actually sends all of our code to Heroku so that it can actually be deployed. Okay, so I went ahead and created all of the files that we're going to need to do our deployment. So starting off with the proc file, pretty much what GUnicorn is it handles everything that happens in between the web server and your web application. So with GUnicorn, it makes it a lot easier because we don't have to come up with our own solution to communicate with multiple web servers. And also we don't have to come up with a solution to process a lot of incoming requests and kind of like distribute the load evenly. These are all things that are like pretty complex, and GUnicorn just makes it super simple and handles like all of that stuff for us. And then at a very high level, WSGI is pretty much just the standard for actually running Python web applications. And then requirements.txt kind of just defines all of the packages and dependencies that our application relies on. Runtime specifies the specific version of Python that we're actually using. And then lastly, WSGI.py is just the file that actually runs our application. Okay, so now that our files are created, the final step in deploying the application is just going to be entering in all of the commands that are necessary to push the code up to Heroku. So the first thing we have to do is actually initialize this as a Git repository, and from there we can just do git add dot, and then we're also going to want to make sure that we commit this. So I'm just going to say initial commit, and now that the Git repository is set up, I can type in Heroku login. Okay, and then now that we're on this screen, we just hit login. We're logged in with the correct account. And then finally, if we run the command git push and then Heroku master, it'll take the code from our local machine and push it up to Heroku. All right, so the process just finished. And just to confirm that it worked, if we go to the Heroku website, we can see that our app got added to the list of other applications. So we can actually click on that. And then if we click on open app, you'll notice that in the URL, it no longer says localhost 8080 or anything like that. Now it's actually a legit live website that's hosted on the Heroku platform. So it looks like our deployment actually worked, which is pretty cool. But yeah, that'll do it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this format where I build a project and kind of just show the highlights or certain moments of me building it. If you guys have any other project ideas, be sure to leave them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe. It really helps out. And I'll see you guys in the next one.